Speedy.
Sounds sweet.
And we're set, James.
Congressman Stokes, would you please state your full name?
I'm Louis Stokes.
Do you have any aliases or other names by which you go?
My family and a few friends know me as Billy.
Okay. We'll call you Congressman Stokes for purposes of this interview. Tell us when you were born and the place of your birth.
I was born February 23rd, 1925, here in Cleveland, Lakeside Hospital.
Tell us about your parents. Were they Clevelanders? Did they come to Cleveland?
Well, both my mother and my dad came from the state of Georgia. Neither one knew one another there. Both were part of the early 20th century migration where black families left the South, went north seeking better lives. In my mother's case, she had only an 8th grade education. She came here to Cleveland to better her life. She said that in the South, the little place she came from was called Rennes, Georgia, and very small place in Georgia. And she had to leave school in the 8th grade, and she only could look forward to doing what she called cropping, which was where they were sharecroppers on land owned by whites. And she looked for a little better life, and so she came to Cleveland as a young woman seeking a better life. And in that capacity, she hired herself out as a domestic worker. And she always called it being in service. And something she was relegated to, and of course she tried to be excellent in her work. My dad probably had less education than she had. He came from another part of Georgia, and I don't recall right now what part it was, but anyway, he hired himself out here as a laundry worker, and that was his occupation. The two of them met, and they got married, and then at the age of 28, relatively young man, he died. He had acute peritonitis, which at that time I guess was something that the doctors didn't know what they know about it today, and I guess couldn't treat it properly, and he passed at the tender age of 28. And that left her with 2 young boys. I was 3, Carl was a year old when my dad passed. So we never knew it.
So you've already answered one of my questions. Who were your siblings? It was you and Carl B. Stokes?
Just Carl and I were the only products of our family.
I see. And where did you live as a young boy growing up in Cleveland?
We lived between Cedar and Central Avenues, lived at 2234 East 69th Street. And we went to school from there, and I guess we'll talk probably about schools later, but we stayed there until I was probably about 14 or 15. Carl was probably about 12 or 13. When my mother was able to move into the Outhwaite Homes projects, which is located off of Woodland Avenue and between what was now Quincy, used to be Scoville Avenues. And so we moved there in the early 40s. We were one of the first families that moved into what they call the projects. And
Congressman, we were picking up that wrestling.
I'm Sorry.
We're picking up that
Oh,
sound.
you might move it?
Yes,
Okay,
okay.
all right, good.
Thank you.
And so we moved there, and then, of course, that's where I went to Central High School and Carl went to East Tech.
Now, the neighborhood that you lived in on East 69th Street, between Cedar and Central, what was the racial composition of that neighborhood?
I recall one Chinese family and one Italian family. All the other residents were black.
And when you moved into the projects, what was the racial composition of?
All black. They had the Cedar projects, which were basically for whites. The blacks lived over in the Outhwaite homes, and then later in other adjacent parts of the projects that they moved, but basically it was all black.
So it was segregated projects as well as
It
segregated
was
housing?
segregated, yes.
Now, you said that you went to school in Cleveland. What schools did you attend, starting with your elementary school?
My elementary school was Giddings Elementary School, located on, between East 70th and East 71st Street. All Carl and I had to do was to walk across the street, go through sort of an alley every morning, and then we walked over to 70th Street, and the school, as I said, was lodged between the two streets.
And what was the racial composition of Gideon's?
Probably one white family I can remember. All the rest were black.
Now, in those days, we had junior high schools. What junior high school did you and Carl attend?
I went to the old Central Junior and High School, and just before I was going to the high school part, they decided to tear Central High School down and build a new high school. And so a new high school was built between Cedar and Central Avenues on East 40th Street. And I went into the first 10th grade class that entered the new Central High School. Carl, for a period of time, attended Central Junior High. And then my mother was able to get him transferred to East Tech. And so he did his, I guess, high school work at East Technical High School.
Now, when you were in attendance at Central Junior High and thereafter Central High School, what was the racial composition of Central during those years?
There were just a very minimal of whites in the school. And when I say by minimal, I'm saying maybe 5 families, very small attendance of white. It was predominantly, I guess, 98, 99% black.
Now, you said Carl went to East Tech. How did he go to East Tech as opposed to Central Junior and Central High School?
My mother had applied for him to be able to try to transfer to East Tech. We actually lived at 43rd and Case Court, and East Tech was, I guess, just 2 or 3 blocks from where we lived in the Outhwaite Homes projects. And similar to our home being very close to Central High School, the new Central High School on 40th Street. But he was probably even closer to East Tech than I was to Central.
You described an application process that your mother had to go through to get Carl into East Tech. Why was it necessary for her to make an application?
You know, I think at that time, East Technical High School was primarily attended by white students, particularly from the west side of Cleveland. And as I recall, in order to get black students there, you had to make an application and be accepted there. And my mother felt that Carl would benefit more from East Tech, and so she made application and he was accepted.
When did you graduate from high school? What year?
January 1943, I graduated from Central High School.
And at that time, was Carl, your brother, already in attendance at East Tech High School?
Yeah, when I graduated from high school, Central High School in 1943, January, Carl was still a student at East Technical High School.
Describe, if you would, what Central High School was like when you were in attendance there, I assume from 1940 to 1943.
That's correct. From 1940 to 1943, I was a student at Central High School. It was a school in which we took great personal pride. Central High School had a long history. I think it had been the first high school to be established west of the Alleghenies in 1876 or something like that. And so it had a long history and a proud history. Langston Hughes had been a graduate of Central High School. As students, we were proud of that. At that time, going to Central High School with all the students there was sort of like going to school with just one big family. All of us knew one another. We had some affiliation or other with one another. One of the things I think that made us very proud was the fact that we knew we were a black school. There was no effort of any kind to integrate us with any other school. And so I guess it was a natural situation of us thinking this was the normal way to go to school. And so we were fortunate in the sense that the teachers there, and they were mostly white teachers, took a lot of time and care and concern about us as students. They, I think, understood that we were black students in a school system where we were considered to be different. And I think they took great pride in letting us know that we were as good as or better than the white students in the white schools in the system. And so they took a lot of time with us academically to make us academically tough and good. And we grew to know those teachers very well and to have a special relationship with them because of the time they took with us and the pride they took in our achievements. And so graduating from Central High School was something that I took pride in.
Well, you said Central High School was the black school. I assume you mean by that it was...
Well, John Hay at that time, I think, was also predominantly black, although I think they still had, at that time in the 40s, white students who were attending there. And then they had, several other high schools around. But Central, where I attended, I knew was 99% black.
Was there any comparison between Central and East Tech, which was probably within walking distance?
I think the comparison you would make was that East Tech, of course, was a technical high school. And those who were looking forward to going into the trades and that nature of employment later preferred to go there, those who could go. And of course, at that time, they accepted quite a number of blacks, but the majority of the students in the 40s there were white.
How did your mother feel about education? Apparently she wanted Carl to get the benefit of a technical education. What was her opinion or feelings about education during the 40s?
Yeah, I think one of her thoughts was the fact that Carl was the better student, and therefore he ought to get the better education. So she didn't want him at Central High School, which may not have had the same reputation with her that it had with us as students. And I think she felt he would get the better education by his going to East Tech. Now, my mother, while she had only an 8th grade education, her greatest dream was to see both Carl and I get a high school diploma. She drilled education in our heads. And she always said to us, get an education. Get something in your head so you don't have to work with your hands like I've worked with my hands. And I didn't always understand exactly what she was saying to us. Carl and I naturally were more concerned about being out and relating to the community and other boys in the community and doing stuff with them rather than just sitting up with those books. So one night my mother was very ill, and we were there in the projects, and her bedroom was up at the top of the stairs. And so she was in so much pain, I could hear her just groaning and moaning. And so I went up the stairs, and her bedroom was right at the top of the stairs. And I walked in the bedroom, and it was dark in there. And I sat in a chair right by the bed. And I reached out and took both of her hands to give us some form of solace, and I hoped that I could just help her feel a little better. And when I did that, and I held those hard, calloused hands from scrubbing floors in white people's homes in order to give me an education, I began to understand for the first time what she was trying to say to me when she said, get something in your head so you don't have to work with your hands like I've worked with my hands all my life. And so I did. I went on and finished Central High School, got my diploma, and went to work on a job. Carl remained in school till he was 16, dropped out of East Tech, went out to Republic Steel and got himself a job pushing a broom. That was so that he could get himself enough money, keep enough money in his pocket so he could hang around on the corner with the boys so that he could shoot pool whenever he wanted to shoot pool. And he was a good pool shooter. And in fact, guys said he was one of the best out there. And but it broke her heart. And because I had already gone into service, I had been drafted in World War II when he dropped it. And when I went to school, he was still in high school. When he dropped out, she wrote to me about it. It broke her heart.
I think you've already answered this, but obviously you feel that you got a quality education at Central High School. Is that a reasonable statement?
I feel that I did, basically because of the way I said in which the teachers spent the kind of time they did with us. When I graduated and I went in service, I found I was able to compete academically with guys who had high school educations and college educations. And so I never felt, in my case, that I had not been given a good basic education.
Well, after your brother dropped out at the age of 16, did you and he ever have any conversations about why? What was he thinking? Anything of that sort?
Not really. I knew my brother, and I knew that was his reason. He didn't see himself as spending more time in school. He thought it was time for him to go to work, get some money, and be able to do the kind of things he wanted to do. Both of us knew that we could not go to college. My mother made it very clear to us that that high school diploma would enable us to be able to get a decent job and work and make a decent living for ourselves. Now, in 1943, a black man could get a diploma and get himself a decent job and have an average type of a living. In my own case, I had been hired at a place called Outdoor Sportswear Inc. It was at 801 Prospect Avenue, downtown Cleveland. When I was hired by this man, I was hired while I was in high school, and he hired me as a porter. It was my job in the mornings when I got there, or whatever time I got there and worked, because I had a shortened academic program at Central, so that I would be able to go to work every day. And this was a series of jobs I had had, but this was one that offered me employment following my graduation from high school. I knew I couldn't go to college, and so I was taking advantage of the fact that this gentleman, when he hired me, said, "I'm going to hire you as a porter." He said, "I've got an idea." He said, "It seems to me that a black person ought to be able to sell to white people as well as white people sell to black people." So he said, "I'm going to do an experiment with you." And he said, "If it doesn't work," he says, "I don't want you to hold it against me." His name was Isidore Appistorff. So he said, "What we'll do, while you're a porter, I'm going to teach you the clothing business." And he says, "I'm going to start you, after you learn the business, to waiting on customers." And most of his customers were white people that came in there. This is downtown Cleveland in the 40s. There were no black salespersons downtown in the 40s working in those white establishments. This was one of the problems that later on, perhaps we'll talk about John Holly and things he had to do to get black people hired in stores downtown. Excuse me, can you?
Yes. Want some water?
Yeah, let me take a little water. I guess you can edit this part out.
We can just play this back. This is Mia's book.
Thank you. Tell me when you're ready.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. So there were no black salespersons in downtown Cleveland in the 1940s, and so I was proud that he saw enough in me to think that I could do something like this. And so when I graduated from Central, I began working there full time. And he had by then trained me on sales, and he hired a young white boy for me to teach the portering work to. And very liberal man, and he's the type of man that's sort of like a father to me. He just took a real special interest in me and advised me, counseled me. And I remember one day that a white guy came into the store, and I walked over to him and I said, "May I help you?" He said, "What did you say?" I said, "May I help you?" He said, "No, you can't help me." So Appistorff walked over. He said, "Lewis, what did this man say to you?" So I told him what he had said. He marched over to this guy, grabbed him by the back of his collar, and shoved him out the door. I said, "We don't need your kind of business." And that really made me feel good and confident about the fact that this would be a decent place for me to work. And I was hoping maybe one day I'd get a haberdashery of my own and go into business. But that was going to be my life. And so Carl felt the same way, that we didn't have any real bright life ahead on us. And was that me?
That is you. That's a great ringtone.
I thought I turned this off. Boy,
I said, that's not mine.
oh man, I'm so sorry.
That's no problem.
Keep-
I didn't know you liked that kind of music. I thought it was their music.
If I can get it off right. This is my wife's cell. I ran out with her cell today. So I don't know.
Let's not worry about it.
There it is.
Okay.
It's off now.
Okay, thank
That
you.
won't happen again.
What do you want to pick up back where you?
Let's pick up right when you said, I thought I would get a haberdashery.
Yeah.
Okay.
And as I said, in the same manner, Carl didn't look forward to anything like college or anything, and so that's why he saw no problem just dropping out of school.
How long did you work at the haberdashery shop, Outdoor Sportswear Incorporated?
I graduated in January of 1943. In July of 43, almost 6 months, I received notification from the U.S. Army that I had been drafted, and I was given notice that I would be inducted in August of 43. And that's what happened. In August of 43, I was inducted to the Army in World War II. And I served until 1946, about 31 months.
So you were in the military while World War II was still going on.
Oh, yes.
Describe what the military was like. They were segregated in those years, but did you have any contact or involvement with non-African American soldiers?
But when I was inducted into the service in 1943, I was inducted into a segregated service system. White soldiers served only with white soldiers, and black soldiers served only with black soldiers. Cleveland at that time, in downtown restaurants, blacks couldn't be served in restaurants in downtown Cleveland. I remember my mother giving me a lecture about the fact that I was now going away. And so she told me in Columbus, she said, you're going to be taken there first. And she said, now, understand that you cannot go into those restaurants down there. So she said, you just stay out of them, and and keep yourself out of any trouble. And she said, after that, she says, you may go south. And she said, south, you have to understand that's their way of life down there. And you won't be able to go into restaurants and do things down there. So she said, you just stay in that service camp, and then when you get ready to come home for holidays, you come home and then go right back there, just like that. So she kind of gave me some idea, because living in Cleveland, I didn't really know what segregation was really about. And so we were inducted in Columbus, Ohio, and we were sent to Jefferson Barracks, Missouri, St. Louis, Missouri, for our training camp. And so I trained there, all black soldiers training in segregated camps. And then we were moving from St. Louis, Missouri to Camp Stewart, Georgia. And we were moved on a train. And so when the train got to Memphis, they took us off the train and took us into the train station to have lunch. As we walked into the train station, the first chamber, the first big room, was occupied by all white soldiers. The next room we were taken past was a room that was occupied by German soldiers who had been captured by the United States. And then there was a black curtain between them and the next room. And then we were all taken into that room behind the black curtain, all the black soldiers. And that was my first real realization of what it meant to be black and to be segregated in the United States. And then, of course, there were other instances of that type of segregation and problems that I had with it as a kid who'd come from the North, not knowing what this Southern thing was all about. But for a while, they had transferred me. I was in the Air Force, but I wasn't flying planes. It was my job every morning. Well, we had two things they did to us. One thing was to, I guess I'm getting ahead of myself. At Camp Stewart, it was our job in the mornings. You get up something like 6 o'clock or so, and early in the morning, we'd be taken down in a truck to the barracks where the white soldiers lived, and they had gone out to fly the planes. And they gave us some long sticks with the nails in the end of the stick. And it was our job to go around and use those sticks to police and clean up around the white soldiers' barracks. And so I happened to be with a group of young persons like myself, and so we decided we weren't going to do it. So as soon as the trucks left, we went over to the library, and we stayed there until the trucks came back for us, until they found out that what we were doing. And so they raided the library and arrested all of us and put us then in segregated little jails. I forget, they had some name for it, I don't remember what they call it now, but anyway, where they had toilets in there for the white soldiers who were incarcerated, and toilets for the black soldiers. And finally they released us. They took us back to our barracks, and they then went to impose punishment upon us. We fought the opponent. We fought the kind of punishment they wanted to give us. I remember I was elected as a spokesperson for the group, and we appealed and went to see the sergeant in charge and all that. Went through that type of thing, and then I remember in Texas, it was our job every morning to go out, and 6 o'clock, 5:30 in the morning, well, we put the gasoline into the airplanes that the white boys flew, and then that was our job. And so those are just some of them. There were many other demeaning things that occurred during the service, but you were made aware all the time you were in there that you were a black soldier.
What effect did this have on you? A young man from the North being put into a segregated army and being subject to discriminatory treatment.
What it told me was that I had to get an education. I knew that I could not live under these kind of circumstances. And I knew Cleveland was probably different, but I knew also that Cleveland had its segregated side. And something just said to me, whatever I do, I've got to get an education. And I guess a part of that was because my mother planted that in me, get an education, get an education. And I realized I didn't have an education simply being a high school graduate. And so that's why I was determined that when I came out of school, that I came out of the service rather, I was going to find a means by which I was going to get a college education. And fortunately, Congress had enacted the GI Bill, which gave service men a chance to go to college, have the government subsidize that education. And so that was the resource that I took advantage of.
Now, you say you stayed in the military for 31 months,
Right.
and you were discharged in approximately 1946?
I mean, it wasn't 46, I don't remember what date.
Okay. But in any event, you did eventually receive an honorable discharge.
Right, I got an honorable discharge, came home, and I went out to Case Western Reserve University and applied. Actually, it was the Cleveland College of Western Reserve University. And the Cleveland College was located downtown, not out on the Reserve's campus. And I applied, and I was rejected. And so I went back to Central High School, to the principal and the assistant principal there, and I told them what had happened. And they were very disturbed about it. And when they checked into it, they were told, well, he's the kind of student who may or may not be able to make these courses out here. Well, at that time, there were very few blacks on the campus at Case Western Reserve, maybe a handful, very few. But anyway, people at Central High School fought for me, and they admitted me. So I was admitted to the Cleveland College of Case Western Reserve University.
Western Reserve. It wasn't Case then, was it?
It was just Western Reserve at that time. They had not yet merged.
I see. And do you recall what year you graduated from Western Reserve?
Well, actually, I didn't graduate from Western Reserve University. I went directly from the university into law school. At that time, you can't do that today, but at that time, if you had 60 hours, or you had an had 60 hours of undergraduate credit, and you had a B average or above, you could go directly from Western Reserve University into Cleveland Marshall Law School, and so I applied under that. I did the 2 years. I had the average, and so I was admitted directly into Cleveland Marshall Law School.
Where was Carl during this period of time?
Carl was still in service, and I think he came out maybe 48, 47, 48 after me. Now, when he came out, he had dropped out of high school, so he went back. Obviously, he encountered the same type of thing and had resolved the same thing for himself. He knew I had already enrolled at Western Reserve University. So when he came out, he went back to East Tech at the age of 21, completed his high school work, got his high school diploma from East Tech, and then he followed me. No, I guess he didn't. I think what happened was he went off to West Virginia State College in Bluefield, West Virginia. And he had a professor down there that said to him, say, Carl, for the black kid who comes up to West Virginia from Alabama, that's progress. He said, for a black kid where Cleveland has Western Reserve University to come down to West Virginia State College is not progress. He said, you need to consider going back and getting your education at a place like Western Reserve University. Carl followed that advice. He then applied and came in to Western Reserve University, and he was in classes out on the campus. And, but still, there were very few, just a handful of black students out there.
Were you and he in class at Western Reserve at the same time, or was he after you?
No, because Carl, I was just there the 2 years, and I started into Cleveland Marshall. So, let me see, and I graduated from Marshall in '53, so 49, I guess. I was in 46, and I must have gone to Marshall in 49. And we may have, our tenures there may have overlapped a little bit, may have. But he had spent about a year or so at West Virginia State.
Now, you've described some of the bad treatment you received while in the military. Did you experience anything similar to that at either Western Reserve or Cleveland Marshall College of Law?
The worst thing I experienced at Western Reserve University was, I remember in a class where we were required to turn in essays, and I turned in my essay, and the teacher had left word for me to come see him. And so I went to see him, and he says, "I want to talk to you about your essay." And I said, "What about it?" He said, "Well, who did this essay?" He said, no black can write like this." And it really, really disturbed me. So I said, "Well, I wrote the article." And he said something, he didn't believe me. So I took it, and I went to somebody at the university there and complained about what he'd said to me and the circumstances of it. I remember that. And I remember another incident where I had, they were having tryouts for reading for acting. And I recall going in and for the tryouts or something. And then I remember the very cold way in which I was treated, and just made to know that they really weren't interested in having me get involved. And so I just went on, and I left that because I didn't have time to go into all of that. But and at Cleveland Marshall, never experienced any problem like that. At the time I went in, Dean Stapleton, Wilson G. Stapleton, was the type of a man who was concerned about scholarship. He really didn't care what color you were. He wanted, if you were a scholar, you didn't have any problem with him. And I think that attitude prevailed on some of the other professors there, but I never encountered any type of racial problem at Cleveland Marshall Law School.
What year did you graduate from Marshall Law School?
In 1953.
Now, when you came out of law school, you had your bachelor's degree, you had your law degree. How much longer was it before Carl also graduated from law school?
I graduated in '53. Carl came out in 1955. And I had been preparing for his coming out so that we could practice together. I'd look forward to the two of us being lawyers together. And I had worked, after I passed the bar, I got an opportunity to work for Carmack Realty Company at 8811 Quincy Avenue. And he was a big real estate broker, and had his own place, Carmack Realty, and it was well known and it was flourishing. And the young lady who was the lawyer for them was leaving. And so she asked me if I'd be interested. And I said, sure. And so he hired me as Carmack Realty's lawyer and gave me the opportunity. He said, when you're not doing my work, he said, you can feel free to practice law on your own. And so that gave me the chance to practice law and have some sort of a base that I could operate out of. And because my dream was to someday be a criminal defense lawyer. And so working for Carmack, when in my off time, I began to go down and hang around the courts, particularly the criminal court, and that's sort of started, a good practice started.
How long did you stay with Carmack?
Till 55, when Carl came out. When Carl came out, we went out at 106 in St. Clair, and there was a building there where we were able to get up on the second floor, and we had a 3-room office. We had a reception area where our secretary was, and then he had an office and I had an office, 2 rooms in the secretarial area. And we set up a law firm of Stokes and Stokes, and that was the beginning of our practicing together.
And what kind of law did you actually practice?
Most of my work was criminal defense work. And naturally, when you start out like that, you take whatever comes through the door. But my concentration was on building a practice as a defense lawyer in criminal cases. And Carl had gotten an appointment as a Cleveland police prosecutor. And so he would come out to the office after he got off from work, and he practiced mostly in the evenings because he had to be on the job all day. And so he was in municipal court as a police prosecutor.
Those are interesting times.
Yeah.
How long did you and he stay together as Stokes and Stokes on 106 in St. Clair?
We stayed, I guess, 2 or 3 years, I think. And what happened was that there was a gentleman who was my idol here as a criminal defense lawyer. It was a man by the name of Norman Miner, probably the best criminal defense lawyer, maybe also prosecutor that the state's ever known. And I used to go, when I had other jobs, I'd take sick leave and go down to watch him in his trials. And I learned so much just from watching him. And then, of course, when I began practicing law and I was handling criminal matters, I would still go over and see him in cases, things of the sort. So one day, I was assigned to a rather notorious rape case where they had to assign 2 lawyers. They assigned Norman Miner, and they assigned me. And I just could not believe that I was going to get a chance to try a case with Norman Miner. And but we tried the case, and when the case was about to conclude and it was going to the jury with closing arguments, he turned to me and says, "You're going to do the closing." And I said, "Man, no mind telling me to do the closing in a case like this." But anyway, I did the closing, and he went back, stood in the back room while I was arguing the case or concluding the jury argument. So the case concluded, and the jury went out, and he talked with me, wanted to know how long I'd been practicing law and other things about my background and this and that. And so he said to me, he says, this summer, I'm going to be vacationing all summer, he says. I'd like to see if you'd be willing to handle cases for me while I'm away. So again, I was just pleased to do that. So I did that for him when he's gone. So I'm sitting in my office one day after September, sometime in September that year, and my secretary says, Mr. Minor's here to see you. And I said, yeah, I know. And I made some comment, dismissing it. She said, no, Mr. Minor is here and wants to talk to you. So I said, okay, and I came out, and it was Norman Minor. And so he looked around at our little spare offices, and then he sat down with me, and he says, how would you like to come practice law with me? Well, I knew what that meant. He had Merle McCurdy in his office. He had trained Merle McCurdy, who became he became the first African-American district attorney to be appointed here. He had the Haynes brothers, Doug and Jimmy, two outstanding lawyers. And so to have Norman Minor say, come into my office, that just meant everything that I had just dreamed of. And so I talked to Carl, and then Carl had been elected to the Ohio legislature. And so we decided to go with Mr. Minor, and we set up the law firm of Minor, Stokes, and Stokes. And then for 8 years, I sat behind him in second chair in all the notorious criminal cases that came, because if you were really in trouble, you wanted Norman Minor. And so I had a chance, an opportunity to sit second chair to him for 8 years. And then Carl and I decided to set up what we felt was going to be the top black law firm in America. So we've gotten Carl Character, Jim Terry, let's see, Stokes Character Terry, Whitehead, George Whitehead, and Perry, the older Perry, who was the mayor of Woodmere. And but there are about 6 or 7 of us in that law firm, all black law firm. And then the law firm was so good, Carl Stokes became the mayor. Carl Character got a judgeship. Jim Terry became transportation head in St. Louis. And then it was just me and George Whitehead and Perry. And then a year later, I ran for Congress, and that kind of depleted the firm.
We'll come to that in just a moment.
Okay.
Tell me this. You've mentioned Merle McCurdy and Norman S. Minor as influential people in your life. I'm going to mention a couple of names, and I want you to react
Sure.
to these names. I'll start with Merle McCurdy, since you did touch upon him briefly.
Merle McCurdy was almost the epitome of Norman Minor. He had a lot of Minor's style and characteristics, tone of voice, and Merle followed Norm Minor as a county prosecutor. He left his office and went down to county prosecutor's office, where he started accumulating the type of a record of convictions that Norman Minor had achieved when he was, and Norman Minor had been the first black county prosecutor ever hired here in Cuyahoga County. He spent 18 years in that office, and he was feared as a prosecutor. And he sent more men to the electric chair than anybody in the history of the state. And then when he went into private practice, of course, everybody who had any serious type of difficulty wanted Norman Minor. And Merrill began to acquire that same type of a reputation as a county prosecutor. But he was smooth, and he was intelligent, he was a good-looking guy. He had everything going for him. And he and Norman Minor had great reputations as lawyers, not only as lawyers, but for the integrity with which they practiced law. I remember about Merrill, one case in which Norman Minor and I were defending someone in a case where Merrill was the prosecutor. And I remember at the closing argument, Merrill said to the jury, "Ladies and gentlemen, I am not convinced myself that this defendant is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt." That was the type of integrity he had.
Almost unheard of.
Yes.
John O'Holly.
John O'Holly was like a father to both me and Carl. Carl loved John O'Holly. He was proud he had a chance to sit at John O'Holly's feet and learn from him. Carl used to drive John O'Holly all over Ohio when John O'Holly was had responsibilities not only with the Future Outlook League, but was doing work at the state level for the Democratic Party. And they had just a great personal relationship. He took a real great interest in Carl and mentored him, great respect. I didn't have as close a relationship with him because I supported him fully, but just didn't have the personal contact with him. But when I ran for Congress, John O'Holly was one of the first people to give his support to me. And I had always admired him because long before we had a Martin Luther King Jr., Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., John O'Holly was leading protests here in Cleveland and giving the kind of leadership that no one else gave. And he was going to jail leading protests for grocery stores in the black community where they would only hire their families, and these were white families. They wouldn't hire any of the residents in those communities. And he used to advocate, don't buy where you can't work. And I remember when at the Woodland Market, which in those days, back in the 40s and 50s, that was a place where all black people went to the market because they wanted fresh food and all that. And yet everybody in there was white. And I remember when he went in there and told those people that you're either going to hire black people or you're going out of business. And so he was arrested many times, went to jail, but it was due to his work that they opened up the RTA buses, where there were no black bus drivers on any of the buses until John O'Holly broke that up. I remember when Arthur Woods, who became a councilwoman later, and she also had the Arthur Woods Fashion Academy, where she trained young women to be models. In fact, my wife was one of her trainees. And but she was the first of the group that he made the Ohio Bell hire as the telephone women receptionists, and that they had at Ohio Bell, where they refused to hire any blacks until he broke it open. So one of the things that I am very thankful for was that in Congress I got a chance to name post offices as a member of Congress. And I remember when I got Congress to name the main post office on Orange Avenue as the John O'Holly Post Office, and we had a beautiful ceremony there. And although John had then passed, but it was just a knowledge that I'd gotten him some recognition for what he had done, but for which no one had given him recognition.
What was the Future Outlook League?
Well, it was an organization that he set up for the purpose of getting jobs for black people. And his emphasis was on jobs that related to black communities and people who were benefiting from the black market, but who weren't giving any jobs to the community.
W.O. Walker.
W.O. Walker was another great leader in our black community. He's respected as one of the top news editors in the country. He had been steeped in black journalism and was the head of the Call Post, the largest black newspaper in our state. But he's very political. And W.O. was a Republican and very steeped in his republicanism. But his exception was when it came to the black community. I think the greatest piece he ever wrote was when Carl first ran for mayor. And the edition of the Call Post he put out just before that Tuesday, he had in red block on the front of the Call Post an editorial entitled, "Any black person who does not vote for Carl Stokes is a traitor to his race." That was the kind of leadership he gave. In both my case and Carl's case, he supported both of us. It was interesting when I went to see him, one of the first things we did, the morning that members of the NAACP, we all used to meet on a Sunday morning out at Shaker Square, the little restaurant, and the executive board. We used to all meet out there on Sunday mornings, and it was out of that experience that morning, and I'll skip most of it. It was decided either Kenny Clement or I should run for Congress, and so, but we agreed we had to go see Carl, and so we went to see Carl that morning. And right after it was decided that I would be the candidate, the first thing Carl said to me was, "Lou, you got to see W.O. right away." And so I did go to W.O., and he, of course, he wanted Charlie Lucas to run, just in case something happened. He felt that the backup should be Charlie Lucas, and of course, as you know, Charlie Lucas opposed me, but he's one of the finest men I've ever known in my life, and a great guy, and I've worked closely with him in the NAACP. And so W made it clear, if anything happens to you, we got to go with Charlie Lucas. And but we had our differences, and we didn't always agree. I didn't like some of the things he did in terms of Republican candidates, but I had to respect him and admire him and acknowledge the great contribution he made to the progress of black people.
Arnold Pinckney.
I just spoke at Arnold's funeral here 2 weeks ago. Arnold was, in my opinion, the best campaign manager best political analysts in the country, bar none. A brilliant political mind. And he ran Carl's re-election campaign for mayor. He ran my first run for Congress. Going back for a moment to that morning at Carl's house, just before he said, "You got to go see W.O., everyone in the room said, "Lou, you got to go see Arnold, see if he'll run the campaign for you." And he did run my campaign. He went with me to Washington after I won, set up my Washington offices, he and I together worked to hire all the staff I hired up there. He came back here, hired the Cleveland staff, and was my office director for a period of time. And then on many other campaigns, national campaigns, and we had presidential candidates in here, I didn't move without calling Arnold. And just as of today, another close friend, Dr. Larry Brisker, was funeralized, and Larry was another person in our community that worked with me and Arnold and Lenny Powell, people like that, on many political campaigns, local and national. So Arnold was the best. We're going to miss him. He was the best.
Nathaniel R. Jones.
I smile because Nate has been sort of like a brother to both me and Carl. Not only we admire him, we love him. He is not only a great lawyer, a great judge, but a great friend. He did remarkable work as the head of the Legal Defense Fund, and I think he took Bob Carter's place and followed him. And so as we sort of look at the head lawyer in the Legal Defense Fund as America's lawyer. He is the top legal firm in America as far as we're concerned. And so we've had the benefit of watching him in his legal career and the extraordinary record that he compiled as a lawyer, and his staunchness as a judge, his legal ability. He's just at the top of my list.
Let me change direction for just a moment. You were around and obviously aware of the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education decision.
Yes.
You would have been in your 20s then, I believe, 1954.
Yeah, 54. Yeah. Well, let's see, 25. Early 30s.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was your reaction when you heard that in a little place called Topeka, Kansas, separate was inherently unequal?
Firstly, Thurgood Marshall, Judge Marshall, had been another one of my idols. I'd followed many of his cases in the United States Supreme Court, followed his career and the kinds of things that happened to him as a lawyer. And so I'd followed that case very carefully as a lawyer. And when I heard the decision, I think I felt, as I think most black people felt, that this was now our way to freedom in this country. We saw the Supreme Court in this case saying that separate but equal is not the law of this land. And we saw them say that segregation of the races of children by race is inherently harmful to both the white and the black child. And I think we transposed the fact that the case was about children in the school into the Supreme Court saying that segregation everywhere is dead in every respect, and we maybe gave even more hope to our future based upon this decision than it deserved. But it seemed to us to open up the door to everything else then in terms of integration of our society. And as a lawyer, I just admired the manner in which that case was handled by Thurgood Marshall and many of the other people whom I knew who were involved in the case. But to me, that was, and will continue to be, just a magnificent decision. And I was proud that we had a court that was unanimous in saying it, which I think gave full weight to the fact that most people said, it's over, we're free.
You also were around when the Little Rock situation occurred, where 9 little black kids were not permitted to gain access to Central High School. What was your reaction in 1957 when that was going on?
Well, I watched that case very carefully too. We had the benefit of seeing television at that time that showed us these little black kids just trying to go to school, being spat upon and being cursed at and treated in the manner they were. Just 9 little children trying to go to school like every other child has a right to do in this country. And of course, it makes you angry to watch and see that in our country, and to see what was going to be done about it. And of course, I followed it when the federal government sent troops in there and that type of thing to do. I later came to know very well one of the 9, and Ernest Green, who became Assistant Secretary of Labor in the Carter administration, and I got to know him very well. And I thought how many times, what a tragedy it was that this bright, intelligent man had to undergo that type of a thing as a child, just to get the education that today makes him a competent Assistant Secretary of Labor for the United States of America. And then I got to know very well the attorney in that case that had taken the case up, and at Howard University, his former Howard student, and we got to be friends with him. I just can't recall his name today, but those type of cases and those victories in the Supreme Court gave all of us the notion that if we can just get our case to the United States Supreme Court, we have a chance to win these decisions. We didn't have much faith in the lower court system, but we felt at that time the Supreme Court of the United States was such a court where black people could get the kind of remedy that they required under our United States Constitution.
Those were turbulent times. I'm going to ask you
Indeed.
to react to some murders in the United States. First of all, the murder of Emmett Till. You were a young man when Emmett Till died. What was your reaction to that?
I think at first, total disbelief that a human being could be destroyed in the manner in which he was destroyed. I admired his mother when she said, and they wanted her to have a closed casket, and she said, oh no, we're going to have an open casket. She said, I want the world to see what they did to my son. And I admired that so much. In many of the lectures I do now, classes I teach at Case Western Reserve University, and I teach a special class there on the civil rights movement. And I emphasize how important it was that when that mother made that decision, that photo and that casket went all over the world, and people were able to see and affect world opinion with reference to that case, which remains one of the top civil rights cases in our history.
Malcolm X.
I saw him speak once when he came to Cleveland. I think that may have been the Bullets and Ballots speech that he made, and I think it was made here in Cleveland. While I was with the NAACP and the leadership of the NAACP, and there was no close relationship between the leadership of the NAACP and Malcolm X. I personally, I think, recognized that in his own way, he made a substantial contribution to civil rights and the advancement of black people. I felt we couldn't all be saying the same thing. We couldn't all be approaching it in the same way. That Malcolm X's speeches drew much more attention than a speech Roy Wilkins would have made on the same subject because of the kind of oratory that Malcolm X was going to make in his statement. And so I felt that Malcolm X made a great contribution to the civil rights movement in his own right.
An obvious person, Martin Luther King Jr.
Well, I was privileged to know Dr. King because he came to Cleveland on many occasions. I think the first time I heard him speak and got a chance to meet him was at Olivet Institutional Baptist Church when Dr. Hoover brought him to Cleveland. They were very close friends. But he came to Cleveland in 1965 and came here again in 1967. And the purpose of his visits on both of those occasions was as a part of a Carnegie Institute project in which he was involved. He came to Cleveland to lead a movement to register black voters as they had never been registered anywhere else in America. He did that in 1965, he did it in 1967. I remember when he would stand on a flatbed truck at the corner of 55th and Central, 79th and Cedar, 105th and Chester, and many other places where he would exhort black people to vote. Now, it just happened that in both of those years, 65 and 67, my brother Carl was running for mayor of Cleveland. And in 1965, when Dr. King registered black voters as they had never been registered before, in a city that was not black, a city that was only 37% black, Carl just missed it being elected mayor by 1,700 votes, which said to us that if people had really realized it, he could have been elected in 65. But we knew that pointed towards the fact that he could be elected in 1967. In 1967, Dr. King came back, worked with us, worked with other officials, and again registered black people as they'd never been registered anywhere in America. The night that Carl was elected mayor, it was about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And outside of Carl's headquarters downtown, at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, people were dancing in the streets all around the headquarters. And about that time, it was decided that Carl would go down and greet these people. He had waited that long because all night the vote had gone back and forth, and so we weren't sure he had actually won until about 2:30 in the morning. And when they went down, it was decided Dr. King would remain upstairs and not go down, so as not to take any of the glitter off of Carl's victory. And so Carl came to me and asked me if I would stay upstairs in the headquarters with Dr. King. And so the two of us sat up there, everyone else went downstairs where the TVs and the people and everything were. And we talked. And in that conversation, he talked of what Carl's victory politically meant to political progress of black people in America. And this was the time he said to me that in spite of this great achievement, he said, we still have to achieve economic parity. He said that no racial group in America has been able to achieve parity in this society without having both economic and political parity in this society. And I think he was a great man. I had 2 other opportunities to relate to him. When I first went into Congress, the first bill that I became a co-signature on was the Dr. Martin Luther King holiday bill. It took us 15 years to pass that bill, but I was able to be on the floor and speak on the bill, and to be able to look up in the gallery and see Mrs. Coretta Scott King and the King family sitting up there, posthumously Dr. King receiving the honor of being the first black American to have a holiday in his honor. And then when Congress decided to investigate his assassination, I was one of the members of Congress placed on the Select Committee on Assassinations, which was given the responsibility of investigating both the assassination of President John F. Kennedy as well as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And then later, I became chairman of that committee and carried out the assignment of being chairman of the committee that investigated both of these assassinations.
Those are troubling times as we look back.
Yes, they were.
You were in Cleveland when the Huff and Grenville riots both occurred. Is that right?
Yes, I was.
What was the community like?
Get you some water before you answer.
Thank you.
Anybody want to take a break right now? Run to the potty?
I think I'm okay. I just
Okay.
need a little water.
You know, I'm cutting through a lot of stuff.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah,
We could do
we could. Yeah, there's so much, man.
when we do Lou Stokes interview number 2.
Yes.
They did that out at Brent Larkin. was doing an oral history for me out at the Maltz Museum.
Mm-hmm.
And we did part one. He said with the others they done one, but in this case he said we got to do two, so they postponed doing the second one.
Well, there's just so much.
Yeah, a lot.
And your memory is so clear. I'm trying to think what I do last week now. Let me think. Okay.
Congressman,
Did we have a question? Or-
I was just gonna say, could you just make sure that, that you spend a little more time looking at James?
At him?
He's a good-looking man. He's a good-looking man.
Talk to
Well, that's my opinion.
My wife would take issue with that.
Yeah. Okay.
We had started to talk about the Huff and Glenville riots, and I was kind of curious as to what the sentiment was in the community during those periods.
When the Huff riots started, I remember my brother Carl was a state legislator. I was an attorney at that time, but I wasn't involved in politics in any way. Early that evening, Carl came by my house and said, "Look, come go with me." So I said, "Okay." He said, "There's a problem down in Huff." So we went down in Huff, and Carl at that time, by being a state legislator, was becoming well known, and particularly in the black community. And so we walked the streets that evening, started early, and things were light. And as we walked through the streets, many people recognized Carl, and they'd come up to him to tell him different things that were happening in the black community. And all the while now, there are fires all around, raging all around us on the streets, fires, bullets, at least shots being heard all around us. And but we walked those streets, and we stopped and listened to people. Carl went into some of the stores, talked to people in the stores, see what they had to say about it. And I remember when we walked on 105th Street, we bumped into Russ Adrian, and Russ was coming out of one of the stores, and he walked for a while with us too that evening. And I don't think we realized how bad it was until the next day when things began to be brought together in terms of how the riot broke out and conditions people were living in, the kind of bad food that was being sold in the stores in the community, the type of lack of health care, the deteriorated housing conditions, and just the utter deteriorated way of life when people were being treated, along with police brutality and a very bad relationship between the police and the residents, because the police came in there acting as though this was some type of a area in which they had domination over the residents. And so the next day, I don't remember now how the two of us got together on it, but Stanley Tolliver and I were very involved in all of the civil rights activities at that time. And most of the time, he was doing pro bono work for CORE, and I was doing pro bono work for the NAACP. And then later, I was chosen as counsel for the United Freedom Movement. So Stanley and I decided that the people in Huff needed an opportunity for a hearing. So a couple of days later, we set up hearings at the old Huff School, corner of 79th, I think it was, in Huff. And for 2 nights, we conducted hearings where those people could come in there and sit before us and tell their story. Those stories about how police would break into their homes, mistreat the women in the home, how they disregarded their decency, things of the sort. They came in, they talked to us about the kind of meat that was being sold in those stores, and they gave a real picture of what was happening on a day-by-day basis in Huff. And as well as problems with the school system and things of that nature. I remember also that about that time, the City Club wanted to do a hearing on the Huff riots and have some of us who were involved speak. And I think it was based upon the fact that the editor of the Cleveland Press, Louis Seltzer, had blamed in his editorials and his writings the Huff riot being based upon communist infiltrators. And so the City Club invited me, I think Lou Seltzer was there, some others, I can't remember now because we're talking about something 50 years ago. But I remember it was my first appearance at the City Club, and I went there as a lawyer. And where in my remarks I tried to put in perspective that those people in Huff didn't need people, infiltrators, to come in and tell them how bad they were living in those conditions. And off the top of my head, I think that's what I remember about the Huff riots.
Now, by the time the Huff riots occurred, the demographics in Cleveland had changed substantially from when you had graduated from Central High in '43. Blacks had started to live in various other parts of the city.
Well, you had a much greater transformation of population by the black community in and around Central area, Huff area, Mount Pleasant area, several other areas, Glenville area. You had migration into the city, and as a result of it, we were getting changes, and particularly in the school system. Changes were beginning to occur.
Now, how did you become involved with the NAACP, and CORE, the United Freedom Movement? How did that actually take place?
Right after I came out of law school, and I was practicing law, as I said, with Carmack Realty, and I was beginning to practice, to try to build a practice of criminal defense law. And this was probably at about the time or just before I went into law practice with Norman Minor. The NAACP was beginning to become very involved in civil rights in the community. The executive director at that time was a young man, Earl Williams. And the president was another young man who just came out of, I think he came out of Case, out of Western Reserve's law school, at or about the time I came out of Cleveland Marshall Law School, and that was Clarence Holmes. And by both of them being young men and having those two positions with the NAACP, they were out to make a name for themselves and to make a name for the NAACP, which up until then had been guided by a little older group of leaders, and the times were different, and the civil rights movement coming into play at this time enabled these two younger men to know that they really wanted to go to work to change things in terms of the civil rights movement. And so both of them approached me and asked me if I would be willing to head up the legal redress committee for the Cleveland chapter. And I agreed to do so. And we were able to put together some very fine lawyers, both black and white, who wanted to be involved in the civil rights movement. They wanted to donate their time to being involved. And so I was fortunate enough to, when I chaired it, to have men like Jack G. Day, who was probably one of the finest constitutional lawyers that this state has ever known. He also was a judge later. And Harry Lehman, another outstanding lawyer who did the brief work for us in one of the cases we took to the United States Supreme Court. Had Jimmy Haynes, of course, who had been with Norman Minor years earlier, and Russ Adrian, probably not only one of the finest lawyers I've ever known, but he was my best friend. And Russ was very much involved in the board work as well as our committee. There were a couple of others, and I can't think of the names right now, but I'll try to. And so the three of us began working together, and we started making things happen. Now, in terms of the Legal Redress Committee, all of the men I just named really wanted to work and to make a difference. And so they worked with me on a lot of different matters. And just off the top of my head, we were doing things like, we had two notorious police killings. One was the Bobby Dunn case, where white policemen approached a black male driving an automobile, and where he shot and killed the black male who was driving the automobile, claiming that he was reaching for a gun. The man's hands were sort of glued to the steering wheel. And this became a case where we took it to the county prosecutor trying to get John Corrigan to indict Bobby Dunn, and it became a very celebrated case, but we were unable to get action through John Corrigan, who was a menace to everything we were trying to do at that time. And I'll never forget the cold manner in which he protected white police who had committed crimes in the black community. We had another case, a very celebrated case, where a white police officer and his partner went up into a home where they approached an individual who was just standing there at the table. They claimed that he had a knife and was a threat, and that he had also hit the police officer. And what we later learned was that he had his partner hit him in order to create the hit that he said the guy gave him. And all the testimony was to the fact the man had done nothing, but he too was dead. We had a redistricting case that we took to the United States Supreme Court when they illegally redistricted the 21st Congressional District to keep Carl from being able to run for Congress. Let's see, we went to the Supreme Court on another case. I'm trying to think of that one. But anyway, there are a lot of actions. We had some women who were stopped on the street one night, one of them pregnant. They were mistreated by the police, all of that. But at the same time, we were filing civil lawsuits. We were busy because both Clarence and Earl were busy. All kind of meetings and demands on the school system and other people, and then we got involved in the school system at the request of the National NAACP, things of that sort. We were busy, and thank goodness I didn't have any business at that time.
Well, tell us about the schools, because we know that there was a lot of conflict, particularly around segregated tactics that the school board was employing. What was your involvement with that?
Well, I guess it's sort of a dual role. I started out just like the others were, being a part of the picketing, just marching with the other pickets and the boycotters and things. I remember some of us picketed out on Murray Hill Road when the activities started out there, where due to the overcrowding of the schools, the young people out there were going to school half a day, and the parents were protesting that their children weren't getting the kind of education they needed. It was creating problems for the families, and they were also concerned about the concept that you had to go to school in your neighborhood, which continued the segregation of black children, because at that time the whole neighborhoods were black, and they took the position, the parents took the position that this is segregation of their children. I remember we demonstrated down in front of the Board of Education, walking up and down the street there. I remember members of the Cleveland Police Department who we knew as being part of the unit that sought out communism and all that type of thing, where they would stand and observe us and things of that sort. I was there, and then my role changed when we decided to have a sit-in at the Cleveland Board of Education. And the decision was to occupy all 3 floors. And I remember when the police came in there and they threw people down. And when I say threw people down, I mean they literally threw people from the 3rd floor down to the 2nd floor, and then threw them down to the 1st floor. Then they arrested them on top of it and charged them and so forth. And then I became the lawyer to go down and represent them. I think Stanley Tolliver represented some of them, and I brought Russ Adrian in with me to try some of those that I was trying. I remember once Russ and I tried cases for 6 months in front of Judge Ted Williams. Those are people who had been arrested that day. Remember Judge Williams throwing out every case for 6 months. And so, I don't know whether I answered.
You were making lots of money in those days, right?
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
So you were representing the demonstrators that were complaining about some of the practices that the Cleveland board was employing. You talked a little bit about relay classes. What were the relay classes?
As I recall, there was one school, I guess, Hazeldale, I believe, and it seems like to me they had over 1,000 students, and it was necessary for them to transfer these kids to other schools. And at one time, I guess there were about 3 other schools that they were trying to transfer them to. But also, the school on Murray Hill, as I recall, was where, due to the overcrowding, they contended they could not take children in for a full day's class. And this is where they went on, I guess, what they call relay classes or half-day classes or something of the sort. But it was not providing a full day's education to any of these children. And
Well, what was the legal strategy and who was involved in deciding what would be done?
well, the 3 main groups, I think there were 1 or 2 outside groups that were also included, but in the sense of the fact that this was a different time in our city, that while we had NAACP, we had CORE, and we had other groups, because I remember Lewis Robinson represented a group, and then there were others who represented groups of sort. And to the credit of the black community, for the first time, we said, we need an umbrella group. While it's fine for each of us to proceed in our own right, that we really need to come together. And so they did. They formed what was called the United Freedom Movement. And Dick Gunn, another outstanding leader in the black community. Dick had come here from Kansas City, I believe, where he got his education and so forth. He came here as a young lawyer and right away started growing and got a lot of attention and gave good leadership in the community. And I think then Dick was elected president of it. It brought under those auspices CORE, which was headed by Ruth Turner, and Ruth later I represented when she was charged for jumping in front of a tractor on Lakeview. And NAACP at that time was headed up by Clarence Holmes, and Lewis Robinson came in with his group and others. I was the attorney for the United Freedom Movement, and we tried a lot of different things. We tried some legal strategies. Most of the strategy was done under the jurisdiction of the United Freedom Movement, and Dick Gunn, working with Thurl Williams and Ruth Turner and the others, were basically the ones who were doing the negotiating with the school board at that time, trying to get them to respond properly to this this terrible situation over there affecting these schools, Hazeldale and the other schools, Brett and some other school.
Were the negotiations successful?
No, they weren't. I remember a couple of times when the school board would agree to something with Dick Gunn, and then they'd go back on their word when the white parents would oppose whatever had been negotiated between the United Freedom Movement and the school board. When the whites' parents reacted to it and opposed it, then the school board would go back on it. I remember once when an injunction was brought against United Freedom Movement from taking action over at a construction center, and I think at Lakeview. And we went to court. I represented the UFM. One of Squire Sanders' lawyers at that time represented Danny O'Loughlin, I believe, and we opposed the injunction they wanted and fought it there in court. And after we presented our evidence, Judge Corrigan reached on his desk and pulled out his decision and read his decision, which had already been written evidently before we had the hearing that day. And then we brought it as a legal action to try and get injunctions to stop construction over at the Lakeview's place where Bruce Clunder, Reverend Bruce Clunder, had died. He was back behind a Caterpillar on the scene. This was a place that Ruth Turner laid down in front of a Caterpillar to try and stop construction. At that time, we also were down at the Federal Building located on East 9th Street, where many of the people, civil rights people, went down. They laid before tractors and other equipment down there to try and stop that building from being constructed. We were busy.
Well, tell me, there came a time when a lawsuit was filed on behalf of Charles Craggett, who was a student in the schools at the time, buying through his mother and father, who was Charles Craggett Sr. and I believe Daisy Craggett.
Daisy Craggett.
Were you involved in that?
Yes, what had happened was National NAACP, I guess, were aware of the Cleveland school system situation. Robert Carter, who at that time was the head of the Legal Defense Fund for the NAACP, came into Cleveland, met with me and my committee, and they said they wanted to make Cleveland the first northern city to be the place of a lawsuit, the Brown versus Board of Education type of lawsuit. This would be the first city in the North in which they brought a desegregation lawsuit under the principles of the Brown case. So we agreed to work with them, and they did some of the legal work. We did some of the legal work here. And then Bob Carter, we filed an injunction against the Cleveland Board of Education to stop them from constructing 3 new schools in the Hazeldale neighborhood, where they already had the overcrowding situation. It already had the transportation of children, where the white parents at receiving schools did not want the children integrated at the receiving school. And our position was that this was resegregation of children to build 3 new schools in the neighborhood under the concept that the board had that the constitutional approach would be to build neighborhood schools, and the fact that the children happened to be black was nothing that they had to look at constitutionally, because that's where they live and that's where the schools ought to be. So we found Daisy Craggett was an activist in the community, and she and her husband provided the children along with other children as the plaintiffs. And so, along with the national chapter, we filed this request for an injunction. The case was filed or given to Judge Kalbflesh as the judge to handle the case. It was understood that Bob Carter, since he'd head of the Legal Defense Fund, would be the trial lawyer, and that we would assist in any way, but he would conduct the case. We went to court, and it was difficult for me to believe that we were in a northern court. Judge Kalbflesh spoke to and treated Bob Carter in a way I have never seen a judge treat a lawyer in a case. Particularly considering that Bob Carter was one of the top lawyers in the nation, been all over the country trying cases. He had succeeded Thurgood Marshall in that position. And Bob's reputation as a lawyer was very close to the eminence of Thurgood Marshall. But from the very beginning, his disrespect towards Bob and the manner in which he spoke to him, and the manner in which he denied motions and things of the sort we would make was reprehensible. And I know afterwards Bob talked about the fact that in all the southern courts he'd been in, federal courts, that he'd never been treated that way. And then of course Judge Kalbflesh rendered a decision in which he denied the injunction, but also had language in his decision to the fact that there was no intent here to deprive these children of their constitutional right, and that we had not proved any intent on the part of the school board to do so, and that he praised the school board for the fact that they were doing everything constitutionally, and this is the way it's supposed to be done, and so forth and so on. But I have to tell you, I appeared before a lot of judges in a lot of courts. He's the only one whose racism was demonstrated clearly and outrightly.
This was in federal court.
United States Federal Court, Northern District of Ohio.
This would have been 10 years after the 1954 Brown decision?
It was 10 years after Brown, right, when they came. They were going to make that move here, the first move here in Northern City.
Who were some of the actors that were serving on the Cleveland Board of Education or employed by the Cleveland Board of Education? Do you remember any names?
People in office?
Yeah, board president, superintendent. Do you remember any of those?
And a lot of those people, I just
Okay.
don't remember.
I was getting at McAllister, Levinson.
Yeah, I remember Ralph. Yeah.
Going into that litigation, were you optimistic or pessimistic about the court's ability to effect change in the Cleveland schools?
Well, frankly, as a lawyer, I thought that Brown versus Board had made it very clear that the type of circumstances that existed here fell within the guidelines of Brown. And we had strategized in that respect, that we were going in under the guidelines in Brown. And so we felt that the situation here clearly fell within those guidelines. So we knew it was new. We knew that in no northern jurisdiction had this type of thing in, where you didn't have de jure segregation as such, as being the prime complaint. But we thought the circumstances here fit that type of legal approach.
Unfortunately, what was the outcome?
Yeah. Well, they threw the case out, and I think that the board, the national board of NAACP, made the decision not to appeal and to just not pursue it at this time. And I think largely it may have been due to the manner in which CalFlesh treated Bob. I imagine that had a factor in it.
What happened to Bob Carter?
Bob Carter became a United States federal district judge, and I'm not sure whether he's still on the bench or whether he's retired.
But he did aspire to the bench
He did.
in upstate New York, as I understand it.
Yes, he did.
This was 63, 64 time frame, and even though it was not a successful litigation strategy, did it have any effect, any lasting effect on the black community and the schools in the Cleveland system?
Well, I think that the black community was behind our effort. I think they felt the NAACP was doing the right thing. But that was a period in which there was great turmoil with reference to the Cleveland public school system. I remember what a big issue busing was. I remember when, after Board of Education, and we were dealing with trying to desegregate Cleveland public schools, that the black community became much more aware of the shortcomings of the Cleveland public school, and wanted something done. And I guess over the years that persisted or continued until the NAACP again took it up with Reed versus State, I guess it was. And the case, which did go with many of the same facts and circumstances, went to the United States Supreme Court, and in which the United States Supreme Court ruled totally against the type of thing that CalFlesh had said in his opinion, when they said that Cleveland public schools had illegally and unconstitutionally and deliberately segregated white and black children in the Cleveland public school system, and that the method or means by which they were doing it was building of these schools and the continuation of building of schools in the black community, which I think was a great decision and great legal work. And I applaud Jim Hardiman and his team for the great work and that great decision.
Looking back with the wisdom of hindsight, do you believe that the attempts to desegregate the schools and eliminate racial discrimination in the Craggett case were worth the effort? Would you do it all over again?
Hey, that's a great question.
Hold on a second.
Excuse me.
We're rounding third.
Thank you. Round and third, okay. I think we'll need another session.
Yes.
I was a proponent of busing. I saw when the Supreme Court said in Brown versus Board of Education that in order to desegregate schools, one of the tools to be utilized would be busing. We had great debate in Congress about what they called forced busing. And we had another representative from Cleveland, Ron Model, who was in the Congress and proposing a constitutional amendment to prevent forced busing. It was my position in the Congress to oppose him. And so we had numerous debates on that issue. I watched what happened to Judge Battisti and the threats to his life as he tried to utilize busing just as a tool provided through Brown versus Board of Education to carry out desegregation, and being mindful also of the fact that most of the children in America are bused to school every day because there is no other way to get them to school than to bus them. So there's nothing inherently or innately wrong with busing a child. And so I went through those arguments, that debate and all that. And then I went through the period when people began to question the fact that with white people leaving the system, the school system was left with busing black children to schools where there are more black children. So resegregation is occurring and that type of thing. And so I'm very much aware of that argument. But to answer the question, yes, I would do it all over again because I think it was the right thing to do at the right time. And I think to have just accepted that and not tried to litigate it and to protest against it and take the other action, I think would be to acquiesce to segregation.
Tell me, what would you want people to know about your struggles to eliminate discrimination, not just in the schools, but in other areas as well?
I think it would go back to that segregation that I was subjected to as wearing the uniform of the United States, to have been segregated and demeaned and treated in the manner that I was as a young kid, 18 years old, and where I made up my mind I had to get an education in order to fight this kind of thing in this country. And I think coming from circumstances from which I came, being poor, living in public housing, that I was consigned in my own mind that I had to in some way contribute to helping make this a better society. And I was gratified that I was able to acquire the kind of an education that enabled me to be able to do that. And I felt that in this way I was giving back to a community that had given me the opportunity to acquire education, to be somebody. And this was my means of doing what I had to do in order to live with myself.
I think I know the answer to the final question, but would you want your involvement with the Cleveland schools to be a part of the Lou Stokes legacy?
When you say my involvement in the Cleveland schools, in what respect now?
Craggett,
Oh,
United Freedom Movement, NAACP, CORE.
yeah, as I look back now, I could not have lived with myself had I not put myself in position to try and help in the struggle that black people have encountered in this country. I'm proud to be able to tell students whom I teach today that I was part of a movement that changed a nation. I described to them the kind of a nation that I grew up in, one which they don't know anything about. They don't know anything about drinking out of water fountains that says white or black only, going to toilets that were for black or for white, or getting on a bus, as I did in the uniform of the United States in Birmingham, Alabama, get in and put my dime in the box, and because white people are standing in the aisle, get back off the bus, go to the rear of the bus, and come in the back door in the uniform of the United States Army. Those are things that I couldn't have lived with if I didn't fight against.
I have no further questions. Why don't we take a quick break to see whether or not see if my colleagues have any more grilling.
Ready for cross-examining?
That's right.
Well, you're a smooth lawyer. You're a smooth lawyer.
I'm gonna run to the bathroom. You guys think of any questions?
That was fabulous, Congressman. That was quite inspiring history lesson.
Well, Dr. Dunn, coming from you,
Oh, please,
that means a lot.
Oh, no, the honor is mine.
Okay, thank you.
I'll take this mic.
I would,
Okay.
before you unmic him, I think Jim was gonna do some
Oh.
wrap-up questions.
Okay.
Oh, really?
I would like to know, what do you see as the current challenges around racial discrimination?
I know we're going to do that.
See, they're going.
What now, Dr. Dunn, what are you saying?
My question is, in your concluding response, you were saying how you couldn't have lived with yourself hadn't you addressed those issues. The natural question for me is, coming from someone such as yourself that's lived and been part of so much of that history, to fight and break down the racial barriers to the point where we have an African-American president. What do you see as the current challenges around discrimination that are yet to be fought, the persistent battles that we have?
Sure.
Now, maybe we can articulate that question, pose it in a better.
We're going to wait till James comes back.
Okay.
Okay.
Sure. Meanwhile, if
Yes.
give me a little more water here.
Did you have any questions? Congressman, as you were talking, I was thinking back I recall when, I don't know if you recall, when you retired from Congress, CSU and Tri-C gave you an honorary luncheon, and I had the honor of doing the welcome, and I stated then that my earliest political memory was associated with the name Stokes, passing out campaign literature for your brother's mayoral campaign as a 6-year-old, one of our neighbors, all the kids out.
As a 6-year-old,
And I remember
huh?
passing out those handbills, and then when you were running for Congress, yourself and your brother, I lived on Gay, street over from John Adams. And we were out in the street playing football, and you and your brother were coming down the street, door to door, and we ran up, and I actually got a signed postcard of you and your brother together.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, we are happy to have met you in your distinguished career.
Little bad kids.
Yeah, no bad kids, yeah.
Well, look how we turned out.
Yeah, he turned out right. He turned out right.
The question I had, James, I kind of articulated to the congressman is, what does he see as being the ongoing challenges and struggles around civil rights, addressing discrimination today?
No.
I didn't write it down.
Okay. Well, I'll just,
Before you get started, go ahead, James. You can sit down. I just need to adjust the light one time after you. Get seated here.
I don't even, you need to ask the question, you can just respond to what Ronnie said.
Yeah, I can,
The ongoing struggle going forward.
yeah. Right.
And we're ready.
Ready?
Darryl?
Okay.
Yes, we're good.
I would be the first to say that we've made progress in America. The civil rights movement changed this nation and changed it forever. The question is, how much change have we made? How much progress have we made? And therefore, I'd have to say we're a long way from where we were before the civil rights movement. Places of accommodation are open all over the country. The problems we had traveling across the country, all those are eradicated. Many doors have been opened. Young people of today don't have to tear down the barriers that many of us had to tear down. If I look, for instance, at the fact that when Carl became the first black mayor of a major American city in 1967, there were no black mayors anywhere in America. Immediately following his election as mayor of Cleveland, we were able to elect black mayors all over the country. Major cities, New York, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, and the long list. And when I went to Congress in 1968, a year later, there were only 6 blacks in the United States Congress. That day, Shirley Chisholm, Bill Clay of Missouri, and I made it 9. That was the largest number to ever sit in the United States Congress since 1875, 1877. Today, there are 43 black congresspersons. So there's progress being made. Let's look nationally. For the first time in the history of this country, a black man sits in the highest office in the world as President of the United States. Obviously, that's progress. But if you have to equate the progress and put it in its proper place, then you have to start looking then at what is the accomplishment in every field in America. If we look at engineering today, very few African Americans are going into the engineering field. The great emphasis today on STEM education has to have the accompanying component of getting minorities in the STEM education process. They need to be able to see engineers and doctors and lawyers in all these fields. In all of these fields that we mentioned, the legal field, very few blacks in the legal profession head up major law firms. I remember when I came out of law school, you couldn't serve or work in a major law school, law firm here in Cleveland. The place I took the bar association application was at Squire Sanders, but I couldn't work in Squire Sanders when I passed. I've just retired from Squire Sanders as general counsel. So progress has been made, but we have a long way to go. We cannot accept the argument, well, you've got the office of the president, what else do you want? We want opportunity. We want equality. And we don't have that yet in this country. And so we can't be still. We still have to agitate. We still have to demand opportunity, equality in every field, so that when it comes, we will be able to say, yes, America is an equal opportunity country in which we have equal opportunity in every area of American life. Until then, we cannot say it. We still must agitate for it.
Whoa. Okay, when we do the movie, who do you want to play you?
Oh, shoot.
Let's say Denzel.
Well, it's an honor for me to have you do this. I've had great respect for you many, many years.
Thank you
I think
very
you're
much.
top. I think you're just a great lawyer.
Well,
I mean,
like you said, we got to keep on pushing.
You got to, yeah. But you younger guys got to keep it going.
Did you officially retire?
I retired from Squire Sanders in June.
I didn't know
I'd
that.
been with them 15 years
Okay.
since I left Congress, but I still teach at Cage. I'm still on Forest City board and do some other things, but I've had 2 retirements.
I was at Case, this was a year and a half ago. Who was the guy that came up here from Alabama because he couldn't go to law school in Alabama? And went to Reserve Law School, got out of law school. Yeah, great.
Who?
Great.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, great.
He's still practicing law and
I
still
know it, got his own firm.
said that when he left, he stopped in Columbus to take the bar,
Yeah.
went back to Alabama, and said he's gonna do everything he could to attack segregation wherever he could. And he's still doing
And
it.
he has.
Yes.
Yeah, he just sent me a copy of this book. He just has, I forget the name of it, but, and this I think is his 2nd book.
Okay.
But he's had a great career as a civil rights lawyer.
See, when I came out, I knew Tom, his brother.
Yeah, Tom, right. Tom.
And I didn't know, how important
Uh-huh,
the Grays were.
yeah.
But I heard somebody told Tom died, but
Yeah.
somebody said he went back and was a Social Security judge or administrative
I
judge,
think he was some kind of administrative judge.
right, in Montgomery of all places.
Yeah,
Where it all started.
right.
So,
Well, Gray was Dr. King's lawyer.
right.
Yeah. And,
That's why it's significant that his brother was back in Montgomery where the bus boycott.
Yeah. too bad they wouldn't give him that Senate seat. He was, they
I
tried
heard
to.
that.
Yeah.
Nate told me that there was some.
Yeah.
With that. So,
James,
Yeah.
we're gonna take a group picture with the congressman.
Okay.
Congressman, you
Will
stay
you sit
seated.
there?
You can stay seated.
Okay.
We can-
well, if I had known that, I'd put on some clean clothes.
Put it down in the middle.
Put a rose among these thorns. Okay.
Okay, so
let's
everybody
hug.
slide over just a little bit. There we go. Keep going.
Did it break?
Stay there just one more time. The congressman knows the trick. You always say one more, and then you take one more.
Yeah. Yeah, right.
Good, good.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
The first one we did was Charles Crackett, the son.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, he's retired from the military now.
Oh,
Actually, we were stationed together. I didn't
Really?
realize it until we started talking about this book.
Uh-huh.
And James mentioned the name Daisy Crackett. I said, wait a minute, I'm stationed in the Air Force with a guy named Charlie cracked it, and we had actually, he was older than I, and he had higher rank, but we had driven home on leave one time together. So I said, I'm going to see if I can find him. I went on Facebook and, you know, searched him out, and sure enough,